You're watching Talking Audio Engineering with special guest Simon Moro. Next question from Ripley Scott. What a name. What is your favourite instrument to engineer and mix, and why? I would say vocals for me.
Ooh,
vocals or drums.
Oh, yeah. A breathtaking vocal is the most special thing to engineer and mix. It's just magic. A vocal is the worst thing to record and to mix. So yeah, I would say a vocal is a special, powerful, exciting thing to work with, especially when it's very good. I would also have to say drums. If I'm talking about purely fun, get me a good groove on a good drum kit, and that's going to be a fun time getting that working.
Assuming they're both high standard, then either of those two.
I would take either of those as well.
Another question from Ripley is, when dealing with phase in a multi-track drum recording, do you utilize time adjustment of individual channels or stick to polarity only?
Do you want to go first?
I don't adjust timing unless the sources have multiple mics. So if a kick comes with a sub kick and an in kick and maybe something on the front, they all operate in different ways in the frequency spectrum to provide the whole of that one piece of the drums, then I will often pick one that I favor in terms of phase and how that relates to the overheads, and then I will drag the others in line or time delay or whatever it is that I need to do to get them to work. As far as delaying the tom-toms and snare to the overheads or even to the room mics or something like that, I used to do that, and I've since figured out that I don't like the sound of it. I feel like you lose a lot of depth that way. My way of dealing with strengthening those phase relationships between the individual mics and the overheads now is just to use an in-between phase adjustment, which is one by Flux called Evo In, and the other one, the most obvious one, is the Little Labs, which I don't have access to. But that's the way I deal with drums.
Yeah, nice. You and I have a different approach to this. In the past, I did manually move things and was happy with the results. The thing you have to be careful about is, what do you start aligning to? Because you can say, I'll align to the overheads, but then if you align to the overheads, you're moving everything toward the overheads, you're losing that distance and effectively making the overheads kind of like close mics from a timing perspective. So let's say the drum was right on the grid, the overheads would be slightly late.
Yeah.
Ever so slightly late. If they were a couple of meters higher, which is unlikely, they could be, 7 milliseconds or something, which is still pretty close. But yeah, so I used to do that, and yeah, I would be more than happy to shift a bottom snare mic or an outside kick or a sub kick. If they were near 180 phase, I'd flip the phase first and then align them.
Yep.
I have tended to find that it's quite common for the top mic to be out of phase with the overheads. So I will phase align to the overheads. But these days, I get really good results with auto align. And I know we differ on this. So I use auto align.
That adjusts the timing and phase.
So it'll do a polarity flip and delay.
Okay, I thought it did in between phase as well.
I don't think so. It's got milliseconds or samples as the value for timing and a phase reverse.
So do you find that turns them into the overheads more into like the close mic timing, or?
Good question. I haven't checked that. I leave the overheads where they are. I time align the top snare and the in kick and the right overhead to the left overhead, or whichever overhead the snare is over. And then I time align the bottom snare to the top snare, the outside kick to the inside kick. I leave the rooms where they are. I very often leave the toms where they are, very often leave the hats where they are. So that's all I'm doing with it.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see a before and after.
Yeah, we should do one of those. And of course, one thing anyone that's done it will notice it instantly. That plugin can't be bypassed for AB. It has to be deactivated. So you have to do the multiple track deactivation and reactivation for the AB.
I would just do a print of both of those on a separate channel and flick between different playlists.
Oh, sure. Just when I'm actually doing it in a mix, though. I don't want to have to print something and then set up another session and import it. Yeah, that's what I do.
Yeah, it's not easy to decide, I find sometimes, between what do you favor. I think the older school guys, they used to line up the overheads to be more phase coherent with the kick, whereas these days it's more it's the snare, the snare, the snare, the snare. For those who are actually recording real drums these days, which I am, obviously, and you are, but seems to be becoming less of a thing. So I think we've answered that. He's got a lot of questions, actually, so I'll skip to the next one. Do you ever find yourself quantizing performance unnecessarily or excessively?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? Find yourself quantizing performances unnecessarily or excessively. I've definitely undone a lot of work in terms of quantizing stuff. Sometimes it's better to just leave it loose because of the human element. What about you, Simon?
I interpret that question, the unnecessarily, as habit. Are you quantizing for habit? So I would say absolutely not. I'm very sensitive to feel and groove. I also have the fortune of being able to book musicians that I want to play on records.
Who are really good at timing.
Exactly. So when I get to work with musicians that require no assistance in that department, it's really easy. That said, I have occasionally thought if there's a song where I might want the verses to feel very rigid and quite robotic, to then have this release and movement in the chorus, I might quantize for feel in that way. So, they're not out of time, but I actually want them to feel like a robot. Or maybe I'll nudge a hit here and there if it's an otherwise perfect take with a snare that's noticeably late or in a bothersome way. But yeah, definitely avoid any unnecessary processing. Is the easiest way to break something. I've been working with some indie acts with less experienced musicians and drums in particular. I just notice when they're the slightest hesitation, just that unintentional push-pull between bars, is so distracting when unintentional. And that's very tricky because that kind of has to be fixed. Otherwise, it's pulling focus from whatever the focus should be, maybe the vocal or whatever. The tricky thing with players like that is often they'll be flamming kicks and snares unintentionally. So then it's really hard to grid. Because are you putting the kick on the downbeat or the snare on the downbeat? Do you want a late snare or an early kick? And that flamming is noticeable and annoying. And
there's also a style of that as well with drummers like Questlove who deliberately do that. I don't know if you're familiar with his work.
Absolutely. If it's intentional feel, then I'm not even concerned because it will feel good. But when it's supposed to be tight and it's moving and it's flamming, that's just a challenge.
Guitarists are the worst.
Yeah. Well, what I find is I'll go between Beat Detective and Elastic Audio. Beat Detective is my preference because if I can do a good job with Beat Detective, I find there are much less audible artifacts than using Elastic Time. So I'll start there. Sometimes I'll just use it to slice the clips and then I'll manually place them and then I'll use it again to do the smoothing. And then I'll manually check to make sure there's no transients sort of coming up mid-fade or anything like that. Or I'll use Elastic Audio if I, like for example, with flammed things or, if the 16th notes on the hats or something really fast with cymbals decaying underneath, then I might have a go with Elastic Audio and just nudge them not onto the grid, but can I just reduce the noticeable problems here?
I actually learned at music college before I studied audio there was a really good guitarist there who I'm still friends with. He showed me how to get the most out of a song. I think we're playing a Bad Love song as a cover or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Got to the chorus and I was playing it pretty much on the beat, like I'd been shown to do for many years. And he really flipped this whole idea on its head for me. He said, all right, so for the first 4 bars, I want you to play a little bit ahead. It needs to feel like it's, a bit more exciting, and then just lay back for the next 4 and then play ahead again and then lay back. And the difference, oh my God, just night and day.
It's cool, yeah.
And it's this, this whole push-pull thing. But it's really interesting, the whole thing about groove, because even though we're told as musicians we've got to play on the metronome, it's really about musicians making a deliberate choice when they want to stretch the groove to go, all right, you're going to play slightly ahead of me. Like James Brown is a really good example of this. As each new instrument comes in, each of them kind of shifts and moves around to accommodate how that new instrument feels. Do you know what I mean? Like you could have the click going in the background and it would be all over the place in terms of where the click is, but because they're listening and they're reacting to each other, there's this creation of groove.
Yeah. It's a good question. I would say only edit to fix noticeable problems rather than making it a habit. It is also genre specific, because if you need to layer it with loops, etc., then you might want it more on the grid. If I'm doing automated quantization with Beat Detective or Elastic Audio, I will use grooves instead of grids to keep a bit more human feel. Another thing you can do if you are doing that and using loops and MIDI, you can then quantize the MIDI with the same groove, do it at the same time if there's any randomization, and that will lock the loops into the same groove as the drums.
A really good tip.
Yeah, there's another handy thing I do. Let's say I've got a tambourine loop or even a tambourine that I recorded. I might print the drums in stereo, just 16 bars or something, use Beat Detective to extract the groove from those drums, and then quantize the audio in the track with those drums, or quantize the MIDI in the track with those drums. So you can create your own grooves that are moving and feel good, that are, in time and moving, and use those to quantize other parts in the song.
That's a great tip. It's a really great tip.
Nice.
It's almost like you've been doing this for a while.
Yeah, mixed a couple of tunes.